Hey guys, so my name is Ginger. I own a company named Leigh Designs. I know it's kind of weird times happening now, and I know that we're all trying to do fun things at home to try to keep ourselves entertained. And after you're done cleaning out your closets, and there's only so many batches of cookies that I can bake, that now it's time to sit down, do a little something for myself, and do a little bit of crafting or artwork or trying new things. Today, actually, what I'm going to do is the very basics and how I start a lot of my artwork, which is attaching and adhering paper, some sort of paper. In this case, I'm going to be working with music sheets, and to whatever surface it is that I'm going to work on. And I work on different surfaces for different reasons, but that'll kind of progress and bloom and blossom into a really cool project that I will get to over the next couple of videos. But this first video is just some products that I've discovered that work really well for me, and maybe you would like to try. And some of them are free, some of them you may already have, some you may need to order online and have it shipped to you. But it's all gonna be good stuff and fun stuff, and hopefully you can take a little something away from it with you, for yourself to apply to your own projects. So let's get started. So today I'm going to show you guys something that I've been doing for years. And it's the very, very beginnings of when I would do a project. And I start with my favorite pieces of paper and attach them to different surfaces with different supplies so that it can be the foundation for everything that I'm about to paint. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is the tools that I use. When I first started out, I would use a chip brush. These come in all different widths and whatnot, and it makes it super easy to take the product and put it onto the canvas and then spread it out in general, put your paper down, spread out the next bit of product, and then use different tools to smooth it out. I do really like these chip brushes. They're super cheap and disposable. They do clean up okay, but don't leave them soaking in water or they'll start to rust. I kind of transitioned to more of this type of a brush, but you do have to be more careful to keep them clean and tidy, but it's nice because it spreads out the product really evenly and smoothly. You just, again, you have to make sure to take care of these and clean them out really well, or else they'll get super stiff and ruined. These giant palette knives, I am a super big fan of palette knives. The second most used tool in our production studio after our hands are palette knives of various sizes and shapes. So these giant palette knives I love because not only does it spread the material, but you can also use it and pretty aggressively to smooth out any bubbles and cracks and seams. Likewise, a smaller palette knife for if you're in a more detailed area or if you need to get a more specific thing worked out, it's really good. And as long as you use it carefully, you shouldn't tear your paper, but you can tear paper pretty easily because they're metal. This is a little Bondo spreader, and so I actually get this from the hardware store, and I think that they use it for repairing cars, like automotive things. But it's kind of nice because it bends a little, but it still is pretty rigid. Like, it doesn't bend a lot. It's really good. The only bad thing about Bondos is this edge, if you are too aggressive with it, you can actually carve into it and make little nicks in the Bondo spreader. And it will end up leaving creases when you're spreading out other things. You can imagine it'll leave like a ridge. So that's the only bad thing about that, but these guys are actually really functional if you're not worried about that part. Of course, this is a name tag that I had from one of my husband's conferences, and this is called multifunctional usage. So if you don't want to spend money on this other stuff, use an old credit card, use a name badge, use your old Costco card, whatever it may be. But these guys come in handy because, again, they're semi-rigid, but you can still grip it pretty easily. Then after about 13 years of me doing this, I discovered one of my very, very favorite tools. It is fantastic. It's ergonomically shaped. It's made of silicone, so it cleans off easily. You can scrape product off of it real easily. You can scrub it off with a little sponge. It's got a nice smooth edge. It can nick, but you'd really have to take something like a knife to cut into it to nick it. So like it's fantastic because it's really resilient, and it can take a pretty good beating when it comes to like being aggressive and using this tool to spread your product and to work out seams. So next up is the actual product that I use, the glue, the sticky stuff to hold the paper to my surface. Again, I've been doing this for years. For 13 years, I've been working with this type of art. And before that, I actually owned a stationery company, and I would use these methods on stationery as well. I have used Elmer's glue, I have used Mod Podge, I have used fancy stuff. I've used all different types of stuff. The one that I like the best is actually the golden polymer medium. This one happens to be the gloss. They also sell a matte or a semi-gloss, various different finishes. And those finishes, you'll just kind of have to figure what project you're working on as to which kind of finish you want. Because if it's gloss, what it's going to do is it's going to actually stop the paint from being able to stick as easily for a certain period of time. So if you want to rub things off, the gloss is the way to go. It will eventually adhere though and bind together. Since it's acrylic products, it's going to turn into plastic essentially. But this has been my favorite so far. And I normally take a little and pour it into, this is actually a cute little like yogurt cup that I'm a fan of the glass cups. So I just keep them and use them for exactly this purpose, because then I can dip my brush into it more easily. And then I always keep a big giant thing of water. This happens to be in an old yogurt container. And that way my brushes and stuff can sit while I move to the next step. So that's the product that I use to attach the paper to my surface. I'm going to show you a couple of different types of papers. I'm a huge fan of music paper, especially old missals from churches, or missalettes from churches, or even these, like, this is just an old piano book. I love the old advertisements on the backs, and I keep those as well for future reference, just in case I need it for something. But I go through and I'll tear out the pages, which I know is probably really upset some people, but I feel like I'm sharing the book with that many more people by using the pages for these type of things. But I always pull to the side the things that I love the names. Like this one's What's Holy Time. I would pull that to the side. The other ones that I don't really, yield not to temptation. I mean, it's cool, but I wouldn't want to put that on my art. So I would just tear these pages down. I keep those in a stack, all trimmed nice and tidy for when I'm ready to do these projects, because I have a tendency to do multiple things at one time, which I'll tell you about later. This is actually a really fun little arithmetic workbook that belonged to Bill M. at some point in grade 2. And I've really enjoyed this book. I've used it a lot. But I love to see the old handwriting and penmanship, and like he got 100 on a couple of things, or on lots of things, but unfortunately, poor dude, he got a 30 on that one. But it's just so cute. I love seeing these type of things, and they make me happy, and all the old illustrations and imagery makes me super happy. This is an old piano book, not a religious one, but just the piano. And it's great. Again, no titles to anything, but I just love all the music notes and everything. And then these guys, actually, I scored, and I found this nice person in Utah, I believe, who has a bunch of old music paper. And I bought some from them, and they were all trimmed and ready to go, nicely cut. And so I can use them right away. The one thing that you'll notice is the difference in the color of paper. This is pretty white. This is very yellowish brown. And then this one is kind of a different, like almost manila envelope color. The papers show up differently once you put the product on, because the product's going to make them a little bit darker sometimes. And so if I'm going to be putting a ton of stuff on the front, I'll use the white, because it's not really going to show up so much that it's white, just the music notes will show through. There'll be little blips in these type of like workbooks that I want to intentionally have show through. So I use those depending on the product that I'm making. So like this says Helen picked 5 flowers. Totally would cut that out and use it on something I know I'm going to paint flowers on. And then this type of paper, this manila envelope color, is really great because it's way more neutral than the other two. And so if I'm doing something pink and then I decide midstream that I want to change it to brown, this color will still work really well. Also, the thickness of the paper can make a difference. Like sometimes it almost turns transparent. You can see the words from the other side of the page onto your artwork. So you just kind of have to play with that and find your books that do the certain things for you that work for the project that you're working on. Paper cutter, can't live without. These are, I've had forever since I did first started with stationery like over 20 years ago. But it's just a Fisker's product. You can replace this blade when it starts to dull. This little thing swings out. And so you can like get your paper to exactly the right size. So once I know what I'm working on, if I need multiples, I cut multiple pieces of paper with this guy. Makes your lines nice and even instead of having to stress with the scissors. Then these, I always keep these scraps because I never know what I'm going to use them for, never know when I'm going to need them. Some will end up being a full solid piece on one surface, but others I can trim into multiple pieces and turn them different ways so that some of it might be that direction, some might be this direction, that type of a thing. So I always keep stacks of paper like this. And because I am who I am, I enjoy putting it on a cute little clip with a nice little piece of ribbon every now and then, because then it also actually hanging on a nail looks super cute in your studio and can be inspiring. You never know when you're going to see that cute little piece of ribbon, that rusty clip with that cute music paper, and go, huh, I think I might want to create something today. Now the surface that I attach the paper to, which, by the way, I'm talking about music paper because I love working with music paper. It's just completely pretty neutral on the background, so you can put whatever you want to on the foreground. But I also sometimes will use scrapbooking paper, again, because I owned a stationery company and designed all my own papers. I'll actually bring in some pieces of color every here and there. Like if I'm trying to make a vase of flowers on a table, sometimes I'll use the colorful paper on the table, but keep the music paper in the background so the flowers have an opportunity to pop off the page, but yet there's still some color in the background where the table is going to be. I always end up using paint over it, but it's still kind of nice in case something peeks through. It looks super cute. But anyway, so these are some surfaces that I'll glue paper to or adhere paper to. This is watercolor paper. I am just an artist by trade and experience and experimentation. So to be completely 100% honest with you, I don't know what this rough means. I do know what 140 pound means. It means that it's very dense, very pretty thick. And I also know that this is 100% cotton, which I love. And whether I'm gonna use it for watercolor or multimedia, I still love watercolor paper. I always incorporate some sort of watercolor into just about all of my artwork, whether it be through pencils or through actual watercolors. But anyway, so I'll just attach paper. If I know I'm making two small ones, then I'll do them side by side and try to get some line of demarcation. Sometimes I mark it with pencil, sometimes I don't. I just kind of eyeball it. And sometimes, unfortunately, you end up having to trim off some of your favorite parts. But as a really great artist once told me, don't become married to your project too early on in the project or you will not make any progress. So even though you have to cut off some of your favorite parts, don't stress about it because something else is bound to become a favorite part. This is actually a canvas panel and it's rigid. It's already been gessoed and it's great to attach any kind of paper on. Again, with that polymer medium, it's fantastic. And they come in all different sizes. They come linen, they come cotton, they come a million different varieties. So you kind of can experiment with it. And or I will mention something about that in future videos. But this one's pre-gessoed, so it's actually prepared surface for it so that it won't absorb all of your product before you're ready. That gesso is great. This is a wood panel, again, purchased from an art supply company. I have already gessoed the front of this one, and we actually have molding paste, which is a different product around the side, because I like to have some texture sometimes. So those surfaces are all great because they're super rigid, so it's easy to make sure that you get like everything adhered really well, and they're super forgiving because they're wood. The next two are actually canvases, and I prefer the stapled on the back, but they're canvases that you can attach the paper to. They're pre-gessoed, so they're ready to go. Because they are fabric, you can see they have a little bit of give, but the good thing about canvas on a stretched board is that it is pretty resilient. After it dries, it'll kind of suck itself back down to where it needs to be, but not quite the same as using wood. The canvas is a great option though. That's actually what I use the most nowadays. But this is a tiny guy and then this is a big guy. So as you can imagine, I'm gonna have to piece the paper together on this surface and use multiple different pieces, probably at different angles, and just attach it in, you know, a somewhat artistic, creative way. But really, truth be told, like I said, don't get married too soon to your project because it's gonna change. I am going to show you what I do to attach paper to a surface. As you can see, this is going to be my pages. This piece underneath had a little bit too much white space, but I still want to be able to use it. So I just cut out another one of these, and it's kind of cute because it almost looks like a banner. So perhaps I'll end up putting some little loop-de-loops and making like a little easel, like a little awning at the top or something like that, depending on what I end up doing in the end. You can also see where I didn't quite come all the way to the edge with it. And what I have found with that is it kind of leaves a nice line of demarcation, and it kind of also lets you be able to smooth it out at the edges. And then when you varnish, it's nice and tidy, and you don't need to worry about things lifting up in the corners or anything like that. So, yeah, that's why I picked these pieces. I'm going to start out by showing you what it's like to do it on the wood canvas. Again, it's a little bit more forgiving because it's such a hard surface, so it takes a lot of, you know, working hard with the pieces and getting all the kinks rubbed out and stuff like that. So as I said, I like to use these type of brushes as opposed to the chip brushes now. Sometimes the chip brushes release hairs, little fibers and stuff like that. And so I prefer not to use it because this seems to be a little bit smoother. I'm also kind of a messy artist, so I'm just going to tell you, I like to go ahead and pour some of this out as opposed to, I'm messy and I'm also like, well, maybe a tad bit impatient. And so I want to go ahead and pour it out as opposed to scooping out one brush full at a time. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that all of the surface is covered, even though I know there's kind of going to be that border of wood that doesn't even get any paint on, doesn't even get any paper on it. I'm not worried about that. I'm just going to still go all the way across. I also want my banner to be on top of the other piece. So I'm going to put this piece down first. While it's wet, I want to go ahead and dip and get some more and spread it out pretty good. More than anything, just to get those edges down. We'll come back to the middle. And you also need to add some more where I'm going to put the banner. It's also okay if it's a little bit cattywonk, as you can see, like it's a little bit wider on this side and maybe angled a teeny bit. Because once you paint it, there's gonna be so many layers on this piece that you're not even gonna notice that. Anyway, so then you just put a little bit more, perhaps just what's on the brush, or if you need a dip again, you can. But see these little ridges, all these little bubbles, I guess, but they're kind of long bubbles. Well, my goal is to try to get rid of as many of those as possible. See all that coming out? That's excess. What I typically do, again, because I work with more than one piece at a time, I typically will rub that instead of back into its little jar. I will typically, here comes a big one, I will typically rub that onto my next surface that I'm going to be applying paper to. But okay, I'm not going straight up and down like this, and I'm not going to where it's laying down flat. I'm going at an angle like this. That is actually critical. It will make a huge difference in success with this whole process. But all that I do is I make sure that that is done on all parts of that big piece at the bottom. And then I'll come through. I don't want to do this way because now I'm going to lift up this banner. So I have to now flow with the direction of the banner to try to get some of these bubbles out. Another option is you could do this before you put the banner down on the first piece and then make the banner a second step. Now I had a teeny little tear right there, but I'm just going to smooth it out in the other direction. And again, part of the reason I use paper is in case something peeking through can add some visual interest to my piece, but also because it adds a nice texture. So if there's ever any little bubbles or cracks or even like that tiny little tear, it's not a big deal. There's gonna be so much other stuff on this piece by the time I'm done that you won't even see that tear. And if anything, it will actually probably add some texture to it. And then of course I always go around and clean off my edges as best as possible. And now there aren't any seams. And because it's so thin, because I squeezed it all out, I kind of squeegeed it out, because it's so thin, it actually will take very minimal time to dry. So that of course makes me happy because again, I'm a tad bit impatient when it comes to being an artist and I want to get to the fun stuff of painting it. So that's on my wood canvas. Again, you can see how it's pretty smooth. And I'm gonna do two more. One on a canvas, it's just a tiny guy, a little 4" by 4", and I'm gonna attach one piece of paper to it. And then one on a piece of watercolor paper that I have two going in one direction and one going the other direction. The other thing, like I was saying about that little flower comment, totally love this. Thy light of love, thy light of love, thy light of love. I just love that. And so what I'm gonna wanna do is, After I attach all this, I'm probably gonna circle that. So as I'm doing my art, if I decide I want that to remain a focal point on the art, or at least a little peekaboo on the art, I've got it there, and I remember that it's there because I've circled it. So let me get started with these last two. That was how I paper my surfaces that I'm going to end up painting on. Like I said, various surfaces, various types of paper. I pretty much always use polymer medium and either gloss or semi-gloss or matte, depending on what I'm working on. And so I just want to show you a few things that actually have paper in their backgrounds. Some you can see, some you can't. These all have paper in their backgrounds, but for instance, this one you can't see it a ton, but you can't see like the music notes and things like that in this little guy. But there's actually lots of texture as a result of the paper that you may or may not be able to see. But when you see it in person, there's a lot of texture. And it's super cute also, just to know that there's back in that background a little missalette from an old church songbook. This one you can definitely see even the words, and you can see the music notes, you can see the refrain, you can see lots of it in the background in these parts of behind the crown. Some of these crowns that I made, you actually don't see any of the paper, but are very minimal of the paper, but it just really depends on the piece, and that's what makes them all each handmade and unique, which is kind of fun. Same with this little bunny, just peaks every here and there. You can see little music notes or little, stanzas, stuff like that every here and there, but otherwise in general, it's kind of a little covered up. The paint also sits on paper a little bit differently than it does on canvas, on fabric, if you will. So when I go to scratching into the surface with different tools, it actually ends up pulling the paint off in a different way than it would if I just did that straight onto canvas and didn't have the paper there, almost as a barrier. So that's one that has it in the background. You can peekaboo it. This guy, same. There's a bunch of little spots that you can actually see music notes and different stanzas and music paper. And then there's sections where you really kind of can't see much of it at all. But it is very interesting how paper works with paint so differently than just canvas does, so than just fabric or even straight up wood works with it. Again, when you carve in, it does different things. It takes watercolor pencils differently, it takes paint differently, it takes charcoal, it takes everything so differently, and so it's kind of a fun thing to incorporate into the artwork. The other great thing about it is, if you are afraid of a blank canvas, there's nothing better than picking out some of your favorite papers or some of your favorite music sheets, looking for some fun words that are inspiring to you, and attaching that to the background so you don't even have to worry about that giant white canvas staring back at you, scaring you to death to get started. Hopefully, everything that I just went through, you can take a few tips and pointers for yourself to work with your own projects. Don't forget, I have mentioned certain products that work best for me. you might love Elmer's glue, and that's awesome. The type of art that I do, as I've said a couple of times, I like doing several pieces all at once. And so for me, Elmer's glue sometimes stayed open, if you will. Open, that means it stayed too sticky, sometimes for too long. Sometimes it wasn't sticky enough for long enough. And so for me, what has worked best is this golden polymer medium. And again, it could be Liquitex, that's fine too. It could be Walmart's brand or Dick Blick's brand, whatever you have. Use what you have and see, but these are things that work great for me. Again, I am not a taught artist, I am a self-learned artist. And so a lot of it has been through experimentation, trial and error and whatnot, which I personally thoroughly enjoy because it lets me find what I want for the reasons that I'm going to be using them, as opposed to, you know, perhaps what they were initially meant for. So in fact, the little spreader that I use to get all the glue out is actually made for gel medium, but it's made for giant canvases and using almost as a trowel to paint with the gel medium, as opposed to squeegeeing glue out while you're attaching paper. But I'm sure they would appreciate knowing that I'm happy using their tool for that. So anyway, I'm so glad you guys watched my video. This has been fun, and I hope that you have learned some things that you can take away and that you don't get too much cabin fever, or at least while you're inside you can enjoy creating some really colorful and fun things that you've been wanting to work on. So that's a wrap. Oh, by the way, thanks so much for joining me, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel.